Hi, my name is Chrisleen.
Hi, I'm Viaire Robinson.
Hi, my name is Rainey Small.
Hello, I'm Ahzaria Garris.
Hi, my name is Zyah Bacuse.
And we're doing our podcast on the Five Bloods directed by Spike Lee. And does anyone want to start with their section?
I could start. I will say that the casting for this movie was pretty spot on. Everybody portrayed their characters and their parts well, but I will say that Delroy Lindo, who played Paul, his performance to me was like the most moving, or like really portrayed that character of somebody who was really affected by war. And I'll be honest, like in the beginning, I didn't really like his character because of his disposition towards his son and like just his personality. But like when his character started getting more fleshed out and you start understanding his backstory, you really start developing this like understanding of why he is the way that he is. He was thrown into this war that he had absolutely nothing to do with. He lost a close comrade that he's been blaming himself for such a long time. And you know, it really just shows like just one story out of thousands of how war can affect you. And I just thought that that was a really moving performance by him, especially when he escaped the rest of the group and he was like doing this monologue by himself. It was just like a really great performance. And I think everybody else, you know, portrayed their parts well, and you start getting like this kind of like attachment to the characters. And that's why the outcome of most of the characters is really like heart-wrenching for me, but I thought everybody played their part very well.
I definitely agree. I guess I could just to piggyback off what you were saying about how like Delroy Lindo's character kind of made us like the audience, like we kind of didn't really like him at first. And I think that just like kind of goes to show like how well written the script is. How like in the beginning he's like, well, like I guess throughout the whole film he's kind of portrayed as like the tormented African American soldier. And I think like his character especially kind of captures like a real African American soldier, Vietnam soldier, just because of like the angst and like the energy that he lets off. Like you can tell that like he's really hurting, but like he has to play tough. And then we see like at the end why that is. And I think his monologue is very powerful in like revealing to the audience the real like sentiments, the authentic sentiments of these veterans.
Same, I also agree, especially with Paul's character. And then in terms of the casting, I think them picking Chadwick for Stormin' Norman was really impactful because we know that he isn't alive today. So it really felt like, you know, especially with the funeral part, that this was real because in real life, he also is deceased. So I really felt that, especially in terms of the whole group losing him as well.
I can kind of talk about cinematography. I just want to say like this film, in my opinion, was beautiful from like start to finish. I just thought that like every frame was picture worthy. Every frame was beautiful. And I think it was interesting the way like Spike Lee incorporated the different landscapes. Like he moved from the kind of like wide fit. He at some points there's a documentary kind of layout. And then I thought it was interesting that whenever they go back to the flashbacks from Army or like memories of Stormin' Norman, it was always in the 4:3 like aspect ratio. And I think that was significant in helping the audience to kind of like reminisce, and it really drew to the experience of the veterans themselves, having the the characters like play themselves, their younger selves, it kind of really emphasizes the message that like the actors are conveying, and it kind of adds to the feel of it, the authenticity.
Yeah, I would say
Brilliant.
the way Spike Lee did this movie was very well. The cinematography was on spot. When they did show the flashbacks to Norman's scenes, it was always in the old style filter camera shot, and I think that also contributed to the authenticity, like you said. And the point of view shots that he would do really was the best to me. They made me connect more to the characters and what they were saying when Paul was talking to the Lamb members. The point of view shots were, it made me focus more on what each character was saying. So I think he did a really good job on that.
Same. I loved Paul's monologue when they had the camera in front of his face. And I felt like it really made it personal and it really made you look into his eyes and have that close personal conversation with him, really listen to what he was saying. I thought that was one of the best parts in terms of cinematography in the movie.
I agree. That part was really intense when he decided to like break the fourth wall and talk to us and do his monologue. I was really moved by it, but it was also like just the look in his eye was super intense. I couldn't look at him the whole time as he was saying what he was saying. But I also really liked, he only did it like a few times, but certain moments, like certain things that would happen, he would like show them twice. Like when, I believe when Otis like met his daughter for the second time before he left and they went in for the hug, like he showed it, but then he showed it again from a different angle. I liked when he did that just because those moments felt like very powerful to the characters, and telling like their different stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the close up view on Paul when he's giving that monologue, it was intentional to me because it was meant for that moment to be uncomfortable for the audience, because that moment for him was very uncomfortable and he was facing himself, and what they say, he was facing his demons and admitting to something that he had held so much guilt on for so long. So that was a moment for us to be uncomfortable at the same time, and also see how war is uncomfortable for the soldiers, especially for when they come back and face PTSD and many other things.
Agreed. And I also thought it was super interesting how like he always, well, he kept saying like, I did 3 tours, like you didn't kill me then, you can't kill me now. And it's just interesting to see how like the ones that remained, they didn't die when they were there during war, but when they came back for their conquest, a good majority ended up dying.
Right.
And a conquest that they took voluntarily at that.
Exactly. Like when they were first there, this was something that, like they said, they had no control over, they had no part in, but this time they're going there with a mission, with a plan, with intention, and now it results in the death of them.
I guess to talk about the psychological impact, this movie definitely messed me up throughout watching the other members die. And I feel like from the beginning to the end, like in the beginning, it kind of sets you up for that psychological impact because they have all these flashbacks, the black and gray pictures of war and the rallies. They're literally showing murder, violence, and homelessness and the protests. So it kind of sets you up. And then they have the intense war scenes and just like the very emotional times where the members died, especially when for example, when Isaiah jumped on front of the grenade and they talked about a soldier who sacrificed himself the same way earlier. And then the white guy who put on Paul's hat, I felt like it was symbolic, especially because it was a MAGA hat at that. And they did this over money. You know?
Yeah, I thought those two scenes were interesting too. When he dove over that bomb and died, I immediately thought back to when they were talking about that soldier who did that. He was like, I love you guys, but I wouldn't do that for you. So the fact that he did that later on was super interesting. And when the guy put on the MAGA hat, I thought that scene was kind of crazy. I thought the fact that he did that and then got what he deserved, which was his death, was just, it was kind of spot on.
And he was also French. I don't know. I haven't put together those pieces yet and thought about it in depth, but he was also French and put on the MAGA hat. And they're supposed to be our ally. And they were involved in the Vietnam War as well. Well, I don't think so, but they had a part with the corruption in Vietnam. So
Yeah, and you saw how like the VC soldiers were working under him and following his commands, which I thought was very interesting.
yeah, and to add to the psychological impact, is the movie sets the scene very early on, because a lot of that was in the beginning of the history lessons I have never learned of. So I went and took my time to learn about those things, and some of those were, I saw very gory images in the video of the general shooting the prisoner. That was gory in itself. So it sets the scene very early on of it being gory and bloody, and that's what we're supposed to feel. That's the point of them making us feel that way for an anti-war movie. They want us to feel uncomfortable. They want us to see how detrimental war actually is, especially for the soldiers that go through that. That was only a glimpse of what the soldiers actually experienced.
Right, I agree. Like in the beginning, they were also being called baby killers, and they had the paranoia, especially with Paul and his PTSD. And then towards the end, like they kind of tie everything together. Sorry, my dog is right next to me. They kind of tie everything together, and you finally see Paul talking in a calm voice, which I thought was very impactful, since the whole movie he's seen battling himself. And then you see that their money isn't going to waste, and where their money actually goes in terms of making a difference in different organizations. So overall, it was very well put together and set up and set the tone for war in general.
Also
Yeah.
for Paul, I'm sorry, did you want to?
No, please go ahead.
Also for Paul, when they were saying, what's his name? When Otis was telling him that they could go to like an intervention or a therapy session, Paul was not for it. He was totally against it. He didn't want to talk to anyone about it. Towards the end, he gets that relief from the PTSD and that guilt on his own. He ended up not talking to anyone. It was forced upon him in a way that I'm sure he didn't imagine he would go through, on getting that relief from Norman himself, telling him he forgives him, and it was just a mistake, so just to let it go. And his relief was right before his death, and that in itself, many people want to get that relief from grief before they die. That's a lot of people's missions when they're on their deathbeds and things like that. They want to get that relief from whatever wrong they have done in their lives. So I think that was also another psychological impact on soldiers getting the help they need from PTSD or feeling guilty for killing people while they were overseas.
Yeah, I can definitely see what you mean by that, because especially Paul, he was very like anxious and on edge as soon as they landed there, even way before they started on their journey. When they were on the boat and the people were trying to sell him like chickens and fruit and stuff, he just didn't want to talk to anybody. And then they started calling them baby killers and accusing him of killing the guy's parents and things like that. So I completely understand what you mean.
I kind of want to like turn tables a bit, just going back to the history of the movie. One thing that I appreciated a lot was the like the documentary use, which is common amongst a lot of Spike Lee's films, but like the incorporation of archived photos and videos throughout the film, like the use of the videos of Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Dr. Martin Luther King. I couldn't remember I couldn't remember the other characters, but just these archive photos of African American war vets themselves, I think really kind of captures the atmosphere of the era and reminds these viewers of what was happening, and kind of really puts us into the shoes of those Black Vietnam veterans, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I love the fact that they kept on adding flashbacks and kept on talking about different points of history, especially with the African American community, like different milestones that they met in terms of war, politics, even sports and stuff. So I like that they kind of taught a lessons throughout the movie.
Right. I think we were saying earlier how they at the end, I think, or towards the end, Melvin dives over the grenades to save the others as like a sacrifice, and how they were talking about how another soldier had done this in real life, and I think his name was Crispus Attucks, the real soldier. And this is another example of like Spike Lee kind of, I guess, showing real events, like incorporating real events into his film for added effect. And I think another one that was really impactful was when Stormin' Norman was kind of giving those guys the message that when Dr. Martin Luther King had been killed, and the other four wanted to like kind of riot, I guess, and Stormin' Norman was saying no, like we still have to fight this war. We still have to like, you know, be unified. And so I guess they all went against it. And that was a real event that really occurred in real life. And so I think it was just really significant of Spike Lee to incorporate that in the film.
Also for that scene, when the Vietnamese woman is on the radio explaining to them the events that are going on back at home about the police
Right.
brutality against Black people, that was also very impactful psychologically, giving us a point of view of how African American soldiers felt while they were away overseas fighting a war that they had no choice of being in, fighting an enemy that was not actually their own enemy. It was an enemy of the government, a government that was oppressing their people back at home, a government that were mistreating their family members and things like that. So they weren't able to be at home to fight for something they actually believed in, something that was actually impacting them firsthand. So I think that was also very impactful.
Yeah, I really liked when they showed the woman on the radio letting them know what was going on back home, and then always telling them to be safe at the end before after dedicating a song to them. I thought that was really cool. But I guess that kind of makes me want to like jump right into like the settings of the movie, because we've been talking about a lot of different settings. One thing that I really liked is how he showed like the different point of view of the different sides of this war in certain settings. So like he'd show the soldiers' point of view, but then he'd also show what was going on back in America. And he would also show like the horror that the people of Vietnam faced and things like that as he moved through certain settings, which I really appreciated, because he was like, you know, not letting anybody forget that like each side was affected in some way. Like there is one wrongdoer, but there are also like multiple wrongdoers in the story, whether they want to be wrongdoers or not. And I thought him always pulling those flashbacks into the scene, or like showing you the videos or the pictures of certain things in a certain scene, was really powerful to remind us like not to forget the other sides who were affected by this.
I agree. I can move on to the music portion. So a lot of the music on the soundtrack was by Marvin Gaye, and a lot of these songs appeared in the 1970s, which was during the Vietnam War. Some of the songs that Marvin Gaye wrote and created were What's Going On, and that was in the song, in the movie. And that song was about, it was an anti-war song and also talking about the police brutality against Black people. The song was inspired by another musician who created a song about the Vietnam War and what was going on over there. A lot of the songs were about anti-war and injustices faced by Black people. One of the songs, Bring the Boys Home by Freda Payne, was about senseless war and facing death in vain. And some of the lyrics were talking about mothers crying and fathers losing their children. And I think that goes hand in hand with the movie because it was senseless. The soldiers didn't have a choice on going to war. And it also brought into perspective of how the Vietnam veterans faced hatred and disgust from the general public when they returned home. But it put into perspective to me how they could treat them that way because they were drafted, like I said, and it was not voluntary. They were forced. If they didn't go, they would face prison time and face the consequences. But I do understand that some soldiers went overseas and committed heinous crimes. They did a lot of terrible things on their own. So I do understand that in that aspect. But overall, some of those soldiers didn't deserve that. And that really affected them. Another song was, let me see, The Time Has Come Today. And that was about that. It was saying that they were having fun and being loved, but that person eventually was put aside and they were homeless and crushed by the tumbling tide, and their soul has been psychedelicized. That song was played when the Four Bloods and David were in the club in Vietnam, enjoying themselves with the woman and talking to the land members. That song was specifically played during that time. It goes hand in hand. And then Melvin, that's when he went overboard and got drunk and told the secrets of what they were doing. Yeah. And then there was another song, I'm pretty sure it stuck out to all of you all. There was a song from Star Wars that was being played. It's called Ride of the Valkyries, and that song usually is associated with battle scenes, and that was when they were on the boat on the way to their location to find Norman and the gold, and that was right before they got into all the battles with the Viet Cong people and the French. So yeah, the music that went into all of that played hand in hand in Spike Lee's message of anti-war and battles that they faced going back to Vietnam, reliving all of that they once lived before.
I really like the breakdown you just did with all those songs. Taught me something because I didn't know some of the stuff that you were saying, so it was amazing. I also had the part of costumes in the movie, and I felt that there were like a lot of earth-toned outfits that some of the characters were wearing, like especially when they went back, like there was a lot of green, a lot of tan, a lot of brown, which I thought just represented that, like, even though they were not in war, like it still felt like they were in war back in 76 or 68 when they had gone. But I also felt like it just kind of showed like a hierarchy of the characters in a way, because the French guy, he was wearing a suit the whole time. Like every time you saw him, he had a nice white clean suit, and he wasn't really getting his hands too dirty until the end, or until the scene where he died. And everybody else, the VC soldiers, the Five Bloods who went to go look for the gold, even the Lamb people, the bomb detonators or whatever, they also had on like very like rustic clothing and looked like they were also in a little platoon in war when they were in the forest, which I thought was super interesting.
I really like your point about the earth tone colors. I feel like that may very well represent the fact that the remnants of that war is probably just never going to leave them, and it's just always going to be there. So I really enjoyed that point.
Yeah, and I felt like with David, with his shirt, he had the Morehouse shirt on, but I felt like it was white in the beginning, but a completely different color towards the end, like a whole new shirt that was just like brown or another earth tone color. But I also thought it was nice that he wore Morehouse and represented an HBCU too.
I agree. I like that. And I also did notice how his shirt was white in the beginning. And then towards the end, it was a completely different color after being in the forest, in the mud, and the dirt and everything, which I kind of felt was like pretty symbolic, because when we first saw him, his clothes were white, clean, kind of like pure. But then when he went on this expedition with them, he got his hands dirty, he had to kill someone, he was doing a lot of things that he wouldn't normally do back home. So I guess like his impurity kind of like washed away a little bit as he went through the movie, as his character developed throughout the movie.
Yeah, and he was the only one that didn't experience war and killing someone. So that white shirt was a symbolic of innocence in a way. And then towards the end, it was dirty and his innocence was taken away from him.
Yeah, I definitely meant to say innocence and not purity. Thank you for saying that.
So overall, did this movie make you guys feel or have a more understanding about war, different than other war movies that you guys might have watched, or in general?
This was the first war movie I actually watched all the way through and in depth. My views of war aligns with the movie. I'm anti-war, and it was always that way before I watched this movie. But it did give me a different perspective. It put me in the shoes of the veterans, and just analyzing the movie more in depth, like we just did. It gave me more understanding of what actually happened and the actual impact. And it also made me, like someone already said, it made me think about the other side, the people who also fought in the war, the South Vietnamese, well, the North Vietnamese, those were the enemies, but they were also family to other people. They were also loved by other people, and they lost their lives. So everyone grieved, everyone lost someone. It was bad for everyone on both sides. So that gave me a totally different perspective, regardless of who we think is good, like someone already said, and who we think is the enemy. There's loss is loss. Losing a loved one is losing a loved one. So war isn't good for anyone.
I think in like my opinion, like in my experience, this wasn't really like just a war movie. This is like a Black war movie. And I think that's what I appreciate about like it was created like by like a Black director for Black people, like about Black veterans. And I think that was communicated through and through, like through the script, like the way each of the veterans kind of communicated and interacted with each other. It felt familiar for me because like, growing up Black, like it just felt Black, like the gems in between the characters, the way they talked about each other, the way they talked about the war and about America, it just felt authentic. It felt familiar. It was beautiful, in my opinion.
I have to agree with you there on how it felt familiar, especially in the language and like the jokes they cracked, the AAV that they might have used, or just like how they reacted to certain things and how they understood each other on levels that only someone else who goes through the same experience as you would understand.
Yeah, but overall, I think this was a good movie and it had great representation. But with that being said, do you guys have anything else you wanted to say?
Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for listening to our podcast.
Thank you.